How's it going, guys? In this video, I'm going to show you how to install the Zippy spacers and handle inlays in the EPS Wraith. To begin with, I'm going to show you how to install the handle inlays. It's quite easy. I've already done one side. Simply orient the inlay with the textured flat side facing up and this kind of open side facing down into the handle. And we're going to jam this sharp corner into the sharp corner of the inlay and then press it in. And you can either use your fingernail or something like a paper clip to make sure it's pressed in flat. And we'll repeat that procedure for all 8 inlays, 4 of which I've already done. So I'm just keeping this flat side, not the open side, the flat side up, and then jamming the corner into the corner of the cutout, and then pressing it in and smoothing it down with my fingernail. Too easy. If you want to remove these, you could either take the G10 scale off and just pop them out from the other side, or if you're very careful, you can use something like a needle and just come in from an angle and hook onto the inlay very slowly and gently, and then lever it out. If you do that enough times, though, you could leave permanent damage to the polyurethane, so I would say better to set it and forget it. All right, we've just finished the installation of the handle inlays. So let's go ahead and go over the spacers. There's 2 different spacer variants. There's this full-length flush spacer and then the extension spacer. Both of them have adjustable balance, and the way you add this tungsten is you can simply press them in like so, and you can do that for both spacer variants. If you want to add a little more handle bias, this is close to the stock balance. You can use either one tungsten ball or both of them. If you want the most neutral balance configuration available, you would install with none of the tungsten weights, because both of these spacers are lighter than the stock spacer. I'll demonstrate that for you. So first, let's remove a stock spacer. I'm using a T8 Torx driver and just taking out the spacer. So this is the stock spacer. It weighs in at 0.098. And then the Zippy spacer, flush spacer is 0.05 ounces. And then you can add weight to make it 0.092 ounces. Due to the slightly different weight distribution, though, the balance ends up being pretty much identical between these. So again, stock spacer, 0.098, and then here's the extension spacer, 0.058. And it can go up to 0.01, which makes it either lighter or just a bit heavier than the stock spacer. All right, but we've removed the stock spacer, so let's go ahead and install one of the handle extensions. What I'm gonna do to demonstrate the installation of both is I'm gonna install the handle extension on the safe side, and then on the bite side, I'll do a flush spacer. So no matter which spacer variant you purchased, you know exactly how to install it. So I've already removed the stock spacer, so I'm simply going to orient the spacer into the handle like so. And I like to start with this body screw hole here, the one closer to the pivot. And I'm just going to align the spacer and wiggle it until I can get the sex bolt through. Make sure the holes are aligned properly. And that can sometimes take some wiggling, but I've got it through. And now I'm gonna do the other body screw sex bolt. And again, that's just gonna require some wiggling of the top scale relative to the bottom scale to get that through. And now I'm gonna take my T8 Torx driver and then screw in the body screw sex bolts until they don't screw in anymore. And I'm just gonna use normal, firm but gentle force for this. You'll feel it when the screw stops, and you don't need to full crank them and apply as much force as you can. That's a good way to strip the screws. So I just screw them in until they stop, and there's no need to go further than that and try and crank them down with the force of 1,000 suns. The other thing I like to do, this happened to install nicely from the get-go, but if there was any amount of wiggle and your extension was off center a little bit, what I like to do is just with the screws undone, I'll just back them out a little bit. I'm going to orient the spacer, make sure it's centered and I'm happy with it, and then I'm going to screw it in so it looks nice. All right, that's it. That is the installation of the extension spacer. Now let's go through the installation of the flush spacer. So take my Torx driver and I'm going to unscrew both spacer body screws. I'm going to take this thin rigid metal object, in my case a 1.5 millimeter Allen key, and push the sex bolts out, and then the stock spacer will fall right out. And I'm going to orient the Zippy spacer into the handle like so. And again, I like to start with putting the sex bolt in this hole here, the one closer to the pivot. And I'm just gonna move around the Zippy spacer until I get the holes oriented and I can push the sex bolt through. And I got lucky and I happened to get it in on the first try. You might need to wiggle it in, make sure everything's aligned properly. But because I did it, what I'm gonna do now is insert the other sex bolt, and I'm just gonna wiggle it until the holes are aligned. And now you can see I've got the sex bolt through this G10 scale, this G10 liner, and the spacer, but it's getting caught on the top liner. So this is where wiggling comes into play. Just gonna have to wiggle the top and bottom scales very gently relative to another until the holes line up. And now I'm gonna screw in the body screws. And I'll emphasize here, you don't wanna full crank these like your Conan the Barbarian. Just screw them in until the screws wanna stop. You don't wanna damage the screw or anything like that. Once they screw in and it, with firm but gentle force, and it wants to stop, it's gonna naturally stop at the correct thickness and channel width. So there you have it. You have just installed either a handle extension or the flush spacer. And I'll just rotate this so you can see the difference between the two. Anyway, that's the end of the video. Thanks for watching, guys, and happy flipping.